A new study confirms what many economists have suspected for years. Trump's deportation policies are costing American jobs. The real problem is not just the number of workers removed from the economy. It is that mass deportation destroys the labor supply elasticity needed to absorb economic shocks. This creates a strategic blunder where domestic policy directly undermines national competitiveness and long-term state power. Here's the thing about modern economies. They function like complex distributed systems designed for resilience rather than rigidity. When you remove nodes from that system without warning, you do not just create vacancies, you trigger cascading failures across interconnected sectors. Labor markets are no exception to this rule of physics and mathematics. The assumption that labor can be treated as a political signal ignores the fundamental constraints of supply chains and production pipelines. Consider how agricultural and construction industries operate during peak seasons. These sectors rely on a specific type of workforce flexibility known in economics as elasticity. This means when demand spikes, employers can quickly find workers to meet it without causing wage inflation or service collapse. When deportation policies act as a forced reduction in labor supply, they remove that buffer capacity entirely. The system loses its ability to absorb shocks because the pool of available workers shrinks faster than domestic training pipelines can replenish them. This creates what systems engineers call a race condition. You have two processes running simultaneously: rapid removal of existing nodes and slow recruitment or upskilling of new ones. Because the time required for labor training exceeds the immediate operational window, you end up in a state of deadlock where demand cannot be met by available supply. The result is not just empty fields or stalled construction sites. It is systemic failure that ripples through critical infrastructure sectors like food production and housing development. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. The disconnect between political narratives and economic reality becomes stark when we look at the data on marginal utility. One specific study found a ratio of 1 job loss for every 6 immigrants removed from the workforce. This quantifies a precise failure mode where removing workers yields negative returns due to lost complementary skills. In any complex production environment, different roles support each other through intricate supply chain interdependencies. When you decouple labor without building redundant architecture, you do not simplify the system. You make it fragile and prone to collapse under pressure. Think about this in terms of geopolitical competition. States are constantly racing against one another to optimize their economic throughput for global markets. A nation that prioritizes short-term political signaling over long-term state capacity is essentially dismantling its own competitive advantage. The ability to maintain a flexible, elastic workforce is not just an internal policy preference. It is a prerequisite for surviving in the global economy where agility determines survival. The study highlights how treating labor as a weapon rather than a resource ignores these structural realities. When you view workers primarily through a lens of political purity or nationalist signaling, you blind yourself to their functional role in economic stability. This creates a negative feedback loop similar to what happens when software engineers remove servers from a production network without first migrating the data and traffic. The service does not just pause, it crashes because dependencies are severed unexpectedly. This is why domestic policy failures directly degrade national power over time. You cannot simply replace one group of workers with another overnight. There is no magic button to upskill or recruit enough Americans in months, let alone weeks. The latency of labor training pipelines means that any sudden reduction in workforce creates a gap that remains unfilled for years. During those years, productivity drops, wages rise artificially due to scarcity, and businesses begin relocating operations to countries with more stable labor supplies. The political signal sent by mass deportation is one of strength and control, but the economic reality on the ground tells a different story about weakness and fragility. The market responds not to rhetoric, but to supply constraints. When employers cannot find workers, they cut back on hiring, delay expansion projects, or invest in automation that requires capital they do not have because their revenue streams are shrinking from labor shortages. This cycle reinforces itself until the entire economic operating system becomes unstable during any geopolitical transition. We see this pattern repeated across history whenever states attempt to force rapid demographic changes without accounting for systemic interdependencies. The result is always a period of instability followed by eventual correction, either through policy reversal or economic contraction that forces adaptation at great human and financial cost. The lesson here is not about morality or ideology. It is about understanding the mechanics of how complex systems respond to stress when their underlying architecture is compromised. The most valuable insight from this analysis is that labor supply elasticity functions as a form of national security infrastructure just like military spending or intelligence capabilities. When you degrade one, you weaken all three pillars simultaneously because they depend on each other for overall system performance. A nation cannot project power globally if its domestic foundation crumbles under the weight of internal policy contradictions. The cost is paid not in political capital but in lost competitiveness and reduced capacity to respond to future challenges. This strategic blunder proves that short-term gains from signaling do not outweigh long-term losses from structural damage. The market does not care about your narrative when it cannot find workers to build the houses or harvest the crops you need for survival. It responds only to hard constraints of supply and demand, creating a reality where political ambitions collide with economic necessities in ways that no amount of rhetoric can resolve without fundamental policy changes. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.